Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to part 7 of my Jospeh Losey season. Today we're going to talk about a film that's not really a Jospeh Losey film, but there is a Jospeh Losey story attached to it. And that's X the Unknown, a Hammer film from 1956, which is essentially the Blob before the Blob. And this is a film that Losey was slated to make. He worked on a part of it, and then he was either ill or Dean Jagger refused to work with him because Dean Jagger was heavily anti-communist, and that's probably what happened. And Leslie Norman took over, but by all accounts Leslie Norman didn't want to do it. Jospeh Losey didn't really want to do the film, but he had to work because, again, we're at the stage of Jospeh Losey's career where he had to take jobs to actually feed his family, which, to be honest, never really changed that much during his career, because it's not as if he became this huge box office legend or anything. So he wasn't that keen on doing it anyway, and Leslie Norman wasn't either. Apparently Leslie Norman and Dean Jagger didn't get on. Hammer wouldn't use Leslie Norman again. So it wasn't particularly a happy shoot. I mean, because we look back on the whole McCarthy witch trials, pretty much witch trials, not very kindly, but you do kind of forget there was lots of people in favour of them. Lots of people got caught up in the paranoia, and lots of people in the industry were in favour, apart from anything else, because it gave them more work, because other people were blacklisted. And also Dean Jagger is one of the more famous people who were anti-communist and anti any hint. If anybody was a communist, they just didn't want to work with them, and were thoroughly unpleasant towards them. The other thing about the film was it was pretty much going to be a Quatermass sequel, but Nigel Neal didn't want to do that, so Dean Jagger's Professor Ralston would have been Quatermass. Nazrin Prod recently did a video on the Quatermass films and included X the Unknown, because again it possibly would have been a Quatermass film. So I'll leave a link to his video, which is excellent. So this is a Hammer. It's 1956. So there's famous names, produced by Tony Hines or Anthony Hines, written by Jimmy Sangster, who would obviously go on for more famous films that he wrote. Michael Ripper appears, of course, who appeared in 20 odd Hammers or something like that. There's lots of familiar faces. Leo McKern is wonderful. There is a future Doctor Who assistant that turns up in a child actor role for those with eagle eyes. So it just has a wonderful collection of faces that you'll recognise. Again, you might not recognise the name, but you'll recognise the faces. And like I say, this is essentially a Quatermass kind of rip-off crossed with the Blob. So we're somewhere in Scotland. There's a character called Haggis, just to confirm that. And there's a military operation about radioactivity. And then during this operation, a huge fissure appears, and soldiers get injured. One of them eventually dies, and Professor Ralston, who is doing research work with radioactivity. He's called in to investigate. His boss is a very kind of prissy and frumpy boss, as bosses in those days were generally portrayed, with the round glasses. And his son Peter is involved in the experiments as well. And then as the film progresses, it's this mud blobby creature who's feeding off radiation and leaving a path of dead bodies. What I will say is the special effects in this film are really good and really grisly. X the Unknown, which was delayed for 8 months before it was released, did have an X certificate, because some of the effects are actually fairly grisly and amongst the most grisly in Hammer's history. It was shot in black and white. This DVD print isn't the best. There is an American Blu-ray, which is quite expensive, but I just went for this DVD. Hopefully it'll get a Region B Blu-ray at some point in a Hammer set. But it looks pretty good considering, and again the special effects are really good. Now it does get a bit silly. The way to defeat the Blob has lots of MacGuffins about radioactivity and keeping sensors in phase, and lots of scientifical nonsense basically. But the whole film is really enjoyable despite its issues. It's a fun little film. It's well worth checking out if you're that way inclined. If you like those 50s sci-fi films with a bit of silliness but played completely straightly. Again, the cast really sells it, because a lot of it is a little bit silly. As far as Jospeh Losey is concerned, it's pretty much the only film in the book that I showed off on the kind of intro to this series. It's the only film that has no mention whatsoever, not even in the index. It's not even brought up at any point. Like I say, Jospeh Losey wasn't particularly thrilled to be doing this film anyway. So when he was essentially fired, even though again the press release was he had an illness, but he was pretty much fired because they didn't want to lose Dean Jagger. I'm sure they could have got Nigel Green or Andrew Kerr, which would have been better. But they took the star over the director. And the director they replaced them with, by all accounts, nobody liked anyway, for different reasons than supposedly being a communist. But it's an interesting, fun little film. It's only about 80 minutes long. It doesn't need to be any longer. It's pretty lean, and it is a lot of fun. And again, if you're one of those people that likes to see all those familiar faces that would go on to do other things, it's full of those kind of character actors. So that's X the Unknown. Not really a Jospeh Losey film, but he was attached to it at one point. But it's well worth checking out, again, if you're that way inclined, if you like those 50s and 60s science fiction films. You could do a lot worse than X the Unknown. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of X the Unknown, and hopefully you'll join me again for part 8 of my Jospeh Losey season. This is Sol Sharon from Sol Sharon Films, saying farewell.